said, well, we're getting better at this.
Okay, thank you, Will. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Township of Nipissing Committee of Adjustment. Guest Paul Goodridge and Patrick Towns, I believe, is online as well. So we'll start with, is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Number 2 is resolution to adopt the minutes of the meeting held January 4th. Councillor Moore and Councillor Scott is quick on that. You're ready. Just read the motion. It's number COAR 2022-04. Moved by Councillor Moore, seconded by Councillor Scott, that we adopt the Committee of Adjustment minutes of January 4th, 2022. All in favor? Penelope?
Yes.
Yes. Carried. First consent application is on behalf of owners Michael and Jane Howes to create 2 new rural residential lots on the subject land for a total of 3 lots. The retained lot is approximately 8.4 hectares, has a frontage of 308 meters on Highway 534. Lot 1 is to be 5.1 hectares with 100 meters of frontage, and separate lot 2 is 4.1 hectares in size and have a lot frontage of 100 meters on 534. And all the lots are vacant, and I open the floor, first of all, for any discussion, comments, or questions. I'm going to start with those of you that are on Zoom. So Penelope, do you have any questions about the house?
Actually, I do, Mayor Piper. Respectfully, I have a concern regarding this application, and specifically relative to its proximity to the Wolf Lake landfill site. My thoughts are, in its wisdom over the years ago, council, in their own wisdom and prudently and following the guidelines of the province, put restrictions or the holding provision, so the H1 provision on the subject lands. This H1 designation in the zoning bylaw was applied to provide for mitigation of potential adverse effects of residing near a dump or a landfill site, in this case, Wolf Lake, thus providing a safeguard to the health and the safety and protection of any nearby residents, and to prevent significant impacts from difficult to control circumstances or nuisance effects which might extend beyond the lands under the certificate of approval for that landfill or for operating a landfill. While the sketch that's provided with the application appears to conform to section 2.2.8.2 of the official plan, because the subject lands appear to be located more than 500 meters from the fill area of the waste disposal site. I think it has to be remembered, though, that fill areas and landfill in particular, but fill areas aren't static. They're continually changing in landfills, which would then again be reflected in the changes to the 500 meter peripheral area, or that buffer, that buffer that's supposed to be the area of protection between the landfill and potentially a residential area. I think overall, the potential for groundwater or surface contamination is one of the biggest downsides, obviously, of residing or building near a landfill site, as are hazardous gases and the release or generation of hazardous gases. My thoughts, or my opinion, is that approval of this particular consent as it is would require the removal of the H1 designation or the holding provision, But this was the very provision that was put on by council in the first place to protect and safeguard the health of the residents. And protect them again from the adverse effects of living near a landfill.
Okay, thank you.
That's it for me.
Okay, any other comment on that particular point? I'm gonna give the floor to Councillor Marchant, if he has any comments first. Councillor Marchant?
No, I don't have any comments at this time.
Okay, thank you. Anybody on the floor?
I have a question, where would the landfill be on this? Doesn't show it. On the other side of the road.
No,
No, it's on the same side.
same side of the
Right
road.
here.
Yes, down on that area right there. In the.
So just show that, and then Mr. Goodrich, I'll give you the floor to speak to that question.
Okay.
That's uphill from the landfill? Down.
Oh, no. The
No,
fire
lots-
hose- The fire hall
The
would be
lots
top,
are down,
and that'd be lower.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
right, yeah. Okay, if there are no other questions here, I'm gonna give the floor to Mr. Goodrich, and hopefully he can answer those.
Well, thanks very much, Mayor Piper. And the comments from Ms. Penelope are well taken. However, I do have a dissenting opinion. And based upon both the official plan, the zoning bylaw, and the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks D4 series guidelines. And these were guidelines put out by the Ministry of the Environment specifically for the D4 series deals specifically with landfill sites and how to mitigate the impacts on the neighboring properties. I'm referring these damn things, but such as it is. So there was a question about where the landfill site is located, and I put it on just so I could approach a little bit closer so everyone could see. This is Highway 534. The property in question is right here, the retained land and the two severed lots. The landfill site is this cleared area right here. And in red, I probably should have done it in a darker color so it's more obvious. But what I've done, I've got the fill area is in the first red line. And then I've also shown the 30-meter buffer zone that extends around the landfill site itself. The D4 series guidelines, I brought them with me, so if anyone wants to view them, you're more than welcome to. The D4 series guidelines, and they've replicated the same wording from the D4 series guidelines in both your official plan and in the zoning bylaw. And in the D4 series guidelines, it's very clear that the assessment area, the study area around the landfill sites for any new land use that's being proposed or any new homes to be constructed is 500 meters. So it's a 5.5 kilometer setback. And in this case, the wording is very specific. It is from the fill area. And so the pink line that I've drawn on here represents 500 meters from the fill area. And as you can see, it comes close, but it does not touch subject property. Now, in the official plan, unfortunately, when the official plan was drawn up, when the schedules, the mapping to the official plan was done, it appears instead that the interpretation at that time was that it was 500 meters from the boundary of the municipal property. And this green line represents more or less 500 meters from the ownership line. So the municipality owns this land in here. But they only have a certificate of approval to operate a landfill site right here. Now, Penelope did bring up the issue about fill areas not being static, and that perhaps it could be expanded in the future. Very true, and that does occur. However, when you look at the configuration of what the municipality actually owns, it comes to a very fine point just because of the way the highway, goes across the property. There are times when you can go beyond the 500 meters, but it has to be identified in the certificate of approval that there may be a potential for that to occur. And in the D4 series guidelines, they're very clear that a 30-meter buffer zone around the landfill site is a bare minimum. Usually, and they state it right in the D4s, and I brought them with me if you need to see it. But typically, the buffer zones around a landfill, around the fill area, are between 60 and 100 meters. Now, you can build with proper studies. The D4 series guidelines state that you can build within 30 meters of the fill area. So you can build right to the edge of the buffer if you do the appropriate studies. If you're outside of the 500 meters, then the studies are irrelevant because they've already assessed it. And in this case, like I said, the buffer zone here, I did bring along a copy of the map for the Wolf Lake landfill site also, which is here. On the previous diagram here, the first red line, what's here in the middle is the fill area. The yellow lands are the buffer. It shows on here that the yellow lands are a 30-meter buffer. So this is the bare minimum buffer that the MOE will allow, or the MECP now, will allow around their landfill site. Clearly, if they were willing to issue the approval for this landfill site with only a 30-meter buffer, then they were convinced that there was very unlikely that there would be any issues beyond that 500 meter. If there was issues identified when they issued the approval, then they would have created a larger buffer and a larger setback. So when we go back to this map, which shows the impact on the neighboring property, to me, this is just a drafting issue. The lines were drawn incorrectly from a misinterpretation of what the D4 series guidelines actually said. The planning report supports, and Patrick is here online with us, the planning report supports that we are in conformity with the official plan. There is no official plan problem. Even though the Schedule B for the official plan clearly shows that this green line is the affected area. The zoning map also creates this green line as the holding zone based on what was on the official plan. But the official plan is very clear that that assessment, the study area, was only 500 meters from the fill area. A full concession in this township is just a little over a kilometer in size. So what the effect of this is that Mr. House's property and the neighboring properties as well have been prejudicially affected by the way the mapping was done. It's no big deal. It was a problem. It was, to me, it was a simple misinterpretation, and there's a simple solution. And that is simply that we direct the planning consultants to have their draft people move the line to where it actually should be, and that will then remove the holding zone category from my client's property. So to make Mr. House, and I know there was a condition being requested.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have people on Zoom who want to look at you.
Oh,
So if you can
certainly.
Bring it a little closer to the camera.
How do I get in there, Chris?
Just right into the middle here, please. Thank you.
Okay, do we? Okay,
Camera's on top of the TV.
gotcha.
There.
So I don't know if this comes through clear enough for you to see it at home. The green line I'm referring to, which reflects the way the Schedule B to the official plan and the zoning map, is around this area. This pink area within here is when we actually measure the 500 meters from the fill area. This is what I meant by the land narrowing dramatically. Like you can see right now that with the buffer attached, we're already right from the east boundary right over to the highway limit. So if there was any expansion of the fill area at all in this location, the only direction it can go is south. And if it heads south, it simply pulls this away from my client's property. There's no way the fill area can be extended to the north, closer to my client's to the house property. So like I say, to me, it's just a drafting issue. The municipality, Ms. Wallace, you are absolutely correct. The municipality was right to put holding zones on the lands that would be affected within that 500 meter radius. However, this property never was within the 500 meter radius, not as defined by the MOE, not as defined by the official plan, and not as defined in the zoning bylaw. And, for just for everyone's information as well, the neighbors on to the west have also contacted me about doing a severance of their property. They'll have the same issue that will come up again. So to make the individual property owner have to go through a $2,500 rezoning application, and then because your bylaws is explicit that we need a sign off from the MOE, we need certain studies done, even though they're not required by the D4 series guidelines. If we have to go into a hydro G assessment of the groundwater movement in this area, you're probably looking at least $25,000 for something that really shouldn't have ever been defined as a holding zone. So in terms of the severances, tons of frontage, tons of area. There should be no issue that way. We've had the MTO come out, assess the permit, the ability to obtain entrance permits. No issue that way whatsoever either. The Conservation Authority has also assessed it for septic system approval. No issue that way. The only issue we have is, are these lands really in a holding zone? Should they be in a holding zone? And should that be a condition of severance consent? I'll throw that back to you, Mr. Chair, for discussion amongst the committee.
Okay, I think from a committee point of view, if this is outside the 500 meter area, then you wouldn't need to do water studies or anything like that, would you?
No.
Okay, so do you want to turn it over to Patrick
Yeah.
then, and he can.
Patrick, if you'd like to say here.
Just to provide, and thanks Mr. Goodrich for the overview, just to provide background for everybody on how the holding symbol came about. When the township updated their official plan, of course, it went to the ministry province for review. And it seems to be a common approach that the 500 meter boundary gets applied from the boundary of the site. It's likely a precautionary measure, but that was the mapping at the time that was provided by the province to include in the official plan. And that, of course, is now, let's say it's embedded in the schedules of the official plan. When the township updated the zoning bylaw, that holding zone now gets transferred to the zoning bylaw. So that's the history of how the site properties in the area are mapped. So one way or the other, we're subject to a hold on this property. As Mr. Goodrich mentioned, there's no planning issues from our side in terms of lot area, lot frontage for the rural area. But we are going off direction from the specific policy in the official plan that applies the setback specifically from the fill area. So now we're dealing with generic mapping that's maybe a little cautionary. And now we're getting into the policies that speak to 500 meters from the specific fill area. So in our opinion, that's the justification based on the policy to remove the hold in this instance. So from a land use planning perspective, at this stage, we're before the Committee of Adjustment right now to consider the consent. We think staff at a staff level, we think the condition is appropriate to remove the hold one way or the other. So that's going to be the applicant applies under section 34. It's not a full-on zoning bylaw amendment process. There is some slight differences in there. For example, it's not appealable. So option one is the applicant removes the hold, or if the municipality so chooses to, they may remove the hold. So there's two options in that regard. But from a land use planning perspective, and considering this consent and the conditions, we still think that the removal of the hold condition that's included before you tonight is appropriate. So if the landowner or applicant wants to canvass council at a later date to pose the question of who's responsible for removing the hold, that could be a consideration. But I just wanted to provide the background on the mapping and then our position on the condition that was recommended before you. Thank you.
Patrick, could I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
If there's no groundwater surveys or anything like that, because it's a generic map and it is outside of the 500 meter area, then what would be an appropriate approximate? There wouldn't be testing, would there be?
No, that's correct, Mr. Chair. No testing required within 500 meters of a fill area.
Right.
Speaking generically, the 500 meters may be overestimated in some cases as well, and that's speaking generically, but it's no different than generic mapping for a wetland, for example. It's maybe a broader mapping just so that the applicant and the township's aware of these features when they review applications. That's the main purpose of the mapping in this case. And then, of course, as we look through the policies, it's a little more refined to speak to that 500 meter specifically from the fill area. So if you're outside that 500 meters, to your question, that negates the need for any studies.
So it would simply be a bylaw change?
To remove the H1 symbol.
Yeah,
Right.
it's under, through your chair, it's still under section 34. It's a zoning, technically a zoning bylaw amendment application, but a little different than what council would deal with in a normal use change. For example, it's just usually when you're removing a hold, there's certain criteria that have to be satisfied. In this case, the justification for removing the hold is that the proposed lots are beyond 500 meters from the fill area. And what removing that hold does is really cleans things up for the future owners of these lots so they don't run into issues when they come in for a building permit and there's a hold on the property. So one way or another, the hold has to be removed here.
If you don't have to do the studies, the approximate, in your experience, the approximate cost, we're not looking at tens of thousands anymore. We're looking at a couple thousand.
Yeah, just preparation of a brief planning report and then whatever it costs to circulate notices and whatnot. And then you'd have a meeting just to release the hold. So it would be, I guess just to answer your question, it would be less time associated with that process than a standard zoning bylaw application.
John Paul, I know I talked to you about this. You seem to think about $2,500.
Well, the regular fee for a zoning bylaw amendment application is $500 application and a $2,500 deposit. So in this scenario, you still have to pay the 500, but you may not chew up as much of the $2,500 deposit.
And how long would this take for the landowner?
That's a hard question, just because I don't know if anybody will appeal it or anything, like, it's hard to know exactly like how long it could take. Like Patrick, though, the general, like, to remove a symbol, it depends like how busy you are to do the report. the 2 or 3
Timeline, 20 days notice. There's no appeal period for removal hold, so that speeds things up in terms of overall approval. But as long as you have 20 days, we can meet next available council meetings, if we're speaking specifically to removal of a hold.
And that's true, Patrick, there's no appeal period, let's not used to that, there's no appeal.
I should, the owner himself or herself can appeal removal of hold, but neighbors can't.
I have a question. So if they drill a well and they find it contaminated, who's going to be responsible?
Through your chair, technically it meets the policies of the OP in that case. So it's difficult to assume where let's say the scenario it is, whether it's from the landfill or not, but technically in meeting the policies of the township, the township, in terms of the consent, it conforms, it complies. So everything's good from the township side.
So there's no liability going to come back to us 10 years from now, saying that it's coming from our thing. Like, we may say yes right now, but in 10 years time, things change. And I don't want to hang out the next 2 councils down the road saying, well, why did you allow us to go?
Just to reinforce Patrick's
just
point,
Maybe make a declaration on the thing that they're within this whatever, or very close to it, so that they know, the future homeowners know where the landfill is and what they're buying. There's no problems now, but I don't know.
just to reinforce Patrick's point of what James is saying, we did get an opinion from our lawyer, just for that exact same question. He gave the same answer Patrick did, like, as long as you follow the official plan policy,
Okay, I just,
the towns.
you know what I'm saying.
I know, no, I totally agree.
Right now, it's not a problem, but 5 years from now, when they drill a well and say it's bad, it's like, they're gonna come back after us for it. Well,
Who do regular well testing on our landfill sites anyway?
yeah,
You do.
So we would have a heads up beforehand.
okay.
Okay, if there are no more questions.
Mayor Piper, I'm sorry, you probably couldn't see my hand.
Okay.
I'm just thinking along the same lines as Councillor Scott. Because of the ambiguity that's been mentioned with both Paul and Patrick, with the official plan, and one uses one line, and the generic drawings and so on. Yeah, I don't know what the reassurances would be that it wouldn't come back on the township either.
Well, again, Patrick has mentioned that, we are following the plan, so it can't come back on us. And I know our lawyer has said the same thing, that it can't come back on the township, regardless, 10 years or whatever. So it just comes down to, I will call a vote and we'll see how it goes.
Well, I agree, Mayor Piper, that we have professionals, we have a lawyer, and we have our plan. And if we aren't going to take their advice, and we're going to stall on a new development, it's just, we're adding more red tape to what we're trying to streamline at the end of the day. So
Thank you for your comment. So regardless, we need a mover and a seconder. And then we will take a vote. And I will read the application. So thank you, Councillor Kirky,
1 second.
Councillor Moore. So I'll read it in its entirety. Number COAR 2022-05. Moved by Councillor Kirky, seconded by Councillor Moore. Application C 2022-02. Applicant Paul Goodrich on behalf of owners Michael and Jane House. Decision: the consent proposes to create 2 new rural residential lots on the subject land for a total of 3 lots. The retained lot is to be approximately 8.4 hectares in lot area and have an approximate lot frontage of 308 meters on Highway 534. Lot 1 is to be approximately 5.1 hectares in lot area and have an approximate lot frontage of 100 meters on Highway 534. Severed Lot 2 is to be approximately 4.1 hectares in size and have a lot frontage of 100 meters on Highway 534. The retained lot, Severed Lot 1 and Severed Lot 2 are vacant. The Township of Nipissing Committee of Adjustment approves consent application C 2022 by providing provisional consent subject to the following conditions. The applicant provides the township with a copy of the reference plan to be deposited in the land registry office that it is substantially in compliance with the application sketch. The original executed transfers, both duplicate originals and 1 photocopy per consent. A schedule describing both severed and retained lots and naming the applicable grantor and grantee attached to the transfers for approval purposes. Entrance permits or appropriate approvals from the Ministry of Transportation. Removal of the H1 symbol from the subject lands. Written confirmation that sufficient capacity exists for treatment capacity for hauled sewage to the satisfaction of the township, and a certificate in the appropriate form prescribed in OREG 197-96 Schedule 1 for signature of the Township of Nipissing Committee of Adjustment official. And I will call for a vote. And I'll record it. Evidently, my name is first. I'm going to vote for. Councillor Kirky.
For.
Councillor Marchant.
Yes, for.
Councillor Moore.
Or
Councillor Scott.
For.
Councillor LaFrance is absent. Councillor Wallace. Pardon me, Member Wallace.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Carried. And I sign, and we don't splash anything around. Okay. So 1 down, 1 to go. This consent proposes to recreate previously existing 40-hectare lots and to create 1 new lot on the subject land. The owner is proposing the following: to create 3 original 40-hectare lots, merge the lots with the budding 40-hectare lots that do not have lot frontage on a municipal road, lot addition to provide lot frontage access to the westernmost proposed lot, lot 16, 1 and 2, and the creation of 1 new lot with lot frontage approximately 182 meters and a depth of 553 meters. Part of lot 17, concession 2, in accordance with drawing dated January 31st, 2022. And I'm going to open the floor again. If anybody has a question about these lots, I'll start with Penelope again.
I think, Mayor Piper, I had most of my questions all resolved by speaking with staff.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Marchant. Can you hear me, Councillor Marchant?
Sorry, I had it muted. Not at this moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kirky.
No, I haven't.
Councillor Scott.
No.
Councillor Moore. If there are no questions, I will ask for mover and seconder. And we will, Counselor Moore and Counselor Scott.
Before we call the vote,
Yes.
I ask for one clarification.
Okay,
The severance is to recreate the original 100-acre lot, other than the 5-acre piece in the northwest corner, so that the abutting lands to the west would have frontage on the municipal road. We're also seeking to create that 25-acre lot out of the northeast corner. But just the point of clarification is that we're seeking to reestablish that 100-acre lot first. And the reason being, yes, there's 200 acres altogether, it's two 100-acre lots. Concession 1, concession 2. But the reason being is that way Mr. McComb can transfer immediately to the purchaser, and that the 25-acre severance is actually for the purchaser's son. But we put it in so it would all go together at once rather than having to come back before the committee. But if the severance consent for the first is for the 100 acres plus the 100 acres immediately south, that transfer can occur immediately. And then Mr. McComb does not have to wait for the survey to be done on the 25 acres and finalize that before he can transfer. Because really, if the survey costs and the additional development costs should be borne by the purchaser, not by Mr. McComb. And that's what we're simply asking. That allows Mr. McComb to finally be able to get this finished up. And then, of course, there's a 2-year period now to fulfill all the conditions. That way the purchaser has 2 years to get it surveyed and to transfer it out. So as long as that first severance is for the 100 acres as contemplated in the official plan, and then the secondary transfer is the severed to the 25-acre piece.
You'd have to recreate them before you do the severance, though, right?
Well, we have to recreate the 100-acre lot
Yeah.
as the official plan contemplates.
That's what
So-
we're doing.
Yes, and then that would be transferred out first. And so that way it would allow the municipality to sign off on severed 1, I'm saying immediately, but after the 20-day appeal, and after the lawyers get the transfer documents up to you. But that would allow that to occur right away, so that Mr. McComb can satisfy, excuse me, should have brought a bottle of water with me. Anyway, that he can satisfy his commitment to the purchaser, and then the purchaser can take his time. We wouldn't have to rush out now when the snow is deeper and survey the 25 acres. We can wait till the spring or the summer to be able to do that. And because one severance isn't really dependent on the other, and you can issue the certificate of consent for severance 1 as of March of 2022, and then the certificate of consent for sever 2 can be issued anytime prior to March of 2024 and still fulfill all the requirements of the Planning Act. So that's the only clarification that I just wanted to make sure. Mr. McComb is my client. I'm here to look out for his interests.
I'd have to ask Patrick, could I do that? Like, if those schedules come in, I gotta sign the Form 2 for the 1. I thought I'd have to sign it with the 2 also, due to the committee decision.
Through your chair. And maybe just for discussion with Mr. Goodrich as well, like the intent was to approve recommend approval for the plan as a whole. In John Paul, I think as long as Mr. McComb's solicitor is comfortable with the conditions as they're laid out tonight, and they have the ability to do that in somewhat what I'll call phases, I think staff would be comfortable with that approach.
You can't,
So
like, you
it's-
applied for that, that's why.
Pardon me?
You applied for that.
Yes.
So like, that's what I was gonna,
Well, what we're trying to do is be open and upfront with everyone. We were showing you what the end product was going to look like. but it's just how we get to that end product. So we could have come and just said, let's just sever out the 100 acres first, with the 100 acres immediately to the south, and then come back later and say, oh, but now we want to do this too. And the 100 acres doesn't count towards your 10 in the calendar year as opposed by municipal affairs and housing. However, the 25 acres would be one of those 10.
And that could happen too, but in
But-
there we might not.
But
have it.
the problem is, if we come back at a later date to do that, you might have already approved 10 other severances, and then we'd have to wait another year again.
So
So
what you're
that's
proposing-
why bringing it all together at one time.
So you're saying we okay this in principle at this point?
What I'm saying is we okay severance one as being that 100 acres, severance two being the 25 acres. So that when the transfer document comes in from Mr. McComb to whoever the purchaser is, it would be all of lot 17, concession 1 and concession 2. He would then transfer it to Joel Purchaser, and then Joel Purchaser's lawyer will send in the transfer documents once we have the survey finished for the second severance. But it's out of Mr. McComb's hands. Mr. McComb doesn't care one way or the other whether the 25 acres gets approved. He's got an agreement to sell the 100 acres to the purchaser. We're just doing this, to put it together, to show the committee, and the neighborhood exactly what we're proposing here. But to have Mr. McComb wait further for somebody else to have to, get their act together. And then they might wait the whole 2 years and not follow through. So it's forcing Mr. McComb to pay for the survey and look after it. So that's what I'm saying. I'm here on behalf of Mr. McComb. Interests are protected, but that we also do what's right for the purchaser.
Patrick, are you okay with the resolution, how it says to recreate the 3 original 40-acre lots then, and then merge the lots with the abutting 40-hectare lots? Because that would still stick.
Yes, comfortable with the resolution, and technically, there's only one new lot being created. So as Mr. Goodrich mentioned, the 10 lots per year, there's only one new lot, and he's right. If you get provisional approval, I would think that would lock up the 1 of 10, let's say, for this year. So I'm comfortable with that as well. After, and just I may add, just after committee's decision, it's really up to the lawyer, solicitor to organize and submit what lots can be created in what order, and accompanied by Mr. Goodrich's survey to do that. So yeah, the intent of tonight was to approve everything as a whole. And if it can be broken up, and that's what Mr. Goodrich sounds like he's trying to accomplish here, to avoid potential delays for the owner. If that's supported by a solicitor, that's fine from staff's point of view.
And just on that point too, we pay 2 separate fees. We pay the fee for severance 1, we pay the fee for severance 2. So it's not like we were just asking for 1 severance with both. We're actually paying twice for what we're paying for what we're getting.
Hey, Patrick, thank you for your input, and thank you, Mr. Goodrich, and I will read the motion. So it's COAR 2022-06, moved by Councillor Moore, seconded by Councillor Scott. Application C 2022-03, applicant Paul Goodrich on behalf of owners Derek McComb and 1904375 Ontario Inc. Decision, the consent proposes to recreate previously existing 40-hectare lots and to create 1 new lot in the subject lands. The owner is proposing the following: to recreate 3 original 40-hectare lots and merge the lots with the budding 40-hectare lots that do not have lot frontage on a municipal road. Lot addition to provide lot frontage and access to the westernmost lot, lot 16, concession 1 and 2. the creation of one new lot with a lot frontage of approximately 182 meters and a depth of 553 meters, part of Lot 17, Concession 2, in accordance with the drawing dated January 31st, 2022, prepared by Goodrich Goulet Planning and Surveying Limited. The Township of Nipissing Committee of Adjustment approves consent application C 2022-03 by providing provisional consent subject to the following conditions. That the applicant provides the township with a copy of the reference plan to be deposited in the land registry office that is substantially in compliance with the application sketch. B, the original executed transfer deeds, both duplicate originals and one photocopy per consent. C, a schedule describing both severed and retained lots and naming the applicable grantor and grantee attached to the transfers for approval purposes. D, Part 2 and Part 3 on Plan 42R 20658 be transferred to the Township of Nipissing. E, written confirmation that sufficient capacity exists for treatment capacity for hauled sewage to the satisfaction of the township. F, a certificate in the appropriate form prescribed in OReg 19796, Schedule 1, for signature of the Township of Nipissing Committee of Adjustment official. G, written approval from North Bay Mattawa Conservation Authority confirming that each of the proposed lots are a suitable size and configuration to accommodate new private on-site sewage and water services. We'll call for a vote, and the order didn't change. Not sure why, but Piper, 4, Kirky,
4.
Marchant,
Or,
Moore,
4.
Scott,
4.
Wallace,
4,
carried. And I thank you. Let me move on to the last part of our agenda, which is the adjournment. And I know Councillor Kirky is putting his hand up all night, so I'm going to let him move the motion. The seconder, Councillor Scott. I have about 6:48 p.m. So moved by Councillor Kirky, seconded by Councillor Scott, that the Committee of Adjustment meeting be adjourned at 6:48 p.m. Piper, yes. Kirky,
Yes.
Marchant. Tom, are you for?
yes.
Thank you. Moore,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
and Wallace.
yes.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight. I appreciate the thought that you put into this, and everybody have a good evening.
Thanks very much.